Greetings, students, and welcome to this episode of The Professor Travel. I am your host, The Professor Travel, coming to you live from Orange County, California. This is the website, blog, and podcast that you go to in order to learn more about different destinations. This is where you go in order to discuss those destinations as a community. You come here in order to hopefully travel more and learn about different spots, but then you also enjoy life more as well. Now, you can always reach me on my website, which is www.theprofessortravel.com. You can also find me on YouTube and Facebook at The Professor Travel. On Instagram, it's a little bit different. It's the_professor_travel. On Twitter, you can find me at TheProfessorTR1. And then if you're a blogger, you can also find me on blogspot.com at theprofessortravel.blogspot.com. Today, I have the great pleasure of introducing you to our visiting professor, Joe Cook-Giles. Say hi to the students, Joe.
Hi, students. Glad to meet you all.
Thank you so much, Joe, for joining us. I really appreciate it. Joe, you recently went on a trip to London. Is that correct?
I did indeed.
Awesome. Well, we're going to find out a little bit more about that, but why don't you introduce yourself to the students? Maybe we could find out a little bit about your education, as well as maybe some places that you've traveled before.
Oh, absolutely. Well, let's see. Education-wise, I don't really tie in at all with my travel stuff because I'm actually a computer science geek. So I got my bachelor's in that, and I've been working in Orange County government for, oh gosh, past almost 20 years now. But in addition to that, I am a complete history nerd. There's really no other way to put it. I love history. I love every aspect of it. And I think one of the things that only in my adult life that I learned is history, when you just read about it, is boring. Boring, because you're just reading about dry things that are done and over with and names and places and dates. But when you're part of a living history group of pretty much any kind, you're learning on the job. That's the best way to put it, is you are experiencing things. You know, you're seeing it, you're feeling it, you're touching it, you're tasting it. And that's what really brings history to life and makes us, all scratch our heads at some point and go, oh, that's why that was done. That's why people did things like this. So.
Now, I was going to say, the picture that you have here is amazing. Okay, this is part of a group that I used to belong to as well. Do you mind telling the students a little bit about this?
Absolutely. I am a member of the Society for Creative Anachronism, which is kind of a technical long word for really one of the oldest, if not the oldest, reenactment groups on the planet. It started in 1966 and has been going strong ever since. And it's a place for anybody that's interested in history of any capacity that's pre-1600. And I dove in head first and have been doing a ton of things and really haven't stopped over the past 30 years. So this picture, actually, it's kind of funny. This was a somewhat candid picture, as we had one of our larger reenactment events that's near Mississippi. And there were some wonderful people there that their specialty is birds of prey. They're licensed to have birds of prey. And there were hawks and eagles and owls and, things that, all kinds of really intense animals that people could go and visit and have the chance to hold. They're not pets, they're animals. And you can't really see it in this picture. I was terrified holding this thing because here's this hawk that could rip my face off easily and there's nothing I could do about it. So I'm just kind of holding him as far away from my face as I can while trying to act calm, and a friend of mine just happened to snap the picture. So, I'm hiding the fear pretty well there, but it was an intense moment.
It's a great picture, and you look amazing in this picture.
Thank you.
Again, I'm so happy to have this here. It's just great. For my viewers, we were gonna go with a different picture, and then I saw this one. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to have this one. So it's just such a great picture. So thank you for sharing that with myself and my students. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Now let's talk about the trip. Now, you decided to go to London. How long in advance did you start to plan for this trip?
Yeah, probably about 4 years ago. Just because I'm a bit of a control freak. Well, 4 years ago, in that you got to save money. None of us are made of money. So it was a matter of stash away, just get in the habit, always stash away. Don't even think about it. Just count it eventually when you think you have enough. And hopefully there'll be enough for the trip and for some souvenirs. So really, I would say about 3-4 years ago or so is when I started getting ready for this trip. And I had been previously only once, and I think from the moment we got back to the States, I was like, okay, the next time we go. So I started saving like within the next month.
So you were very prepared. You'd already been there once, so you were like, "We are absolutely going back. This is just
Oh yeah.
it's in the cards. I have to do this."
Oh yeah.
And just so for my listeners to know, were there any type of visa requirements, travel medications, anything for traveling overseas that you had to take part in?
Not really. I mean, you have to make sure that your passport is updated, and one thing that you absolutely need to remember is government does not work quickly. So if your passport is coming up on expiration, or you're thinking, oh, I'll deal with it later, don't forget it's going to take some time, and you have no control over that, and you have to have it. So make sure you're doing it not, weeks in advance, not months in advance. Make sure you've got that part done.
Yes, and thank you for bringing it up. I am like you. I am a major control freak, and the notion of having to even send in something like your birth certificate or send in something like your expiring passport,
Mm-hmm.
you letting that leave your hands
Yeah,
is a scary, scary moment.
it's very scary.
I don't know if it's going to get lost. I don't know if it's going to come back. It was traumatic for me the first time I had to send it back in order to get it renewed.
Exactly.
But the beauty of it is when you get it back, you're going to get a new one. And then on top of that, you get the expired one as well. So you still have all those memories
Mm-hmm.
that goes along with it. So it's kind of cool as far as that piece goes.
And you get to look at it and say, wow, I've really aged.
Well, now that you bring that up, thanks. I appreciate it. No. Okay, so let's talk about the vacation a little bit. So in the pre-packing process, so now you have a date, you know when you're going to go. What are some things that you're pre-packing for this? And how long are you going to be there for?
Well, we went for about 2 weeks, my husband and I. And the biggest thing really for me in mentally preparing is the last time we were there, the weather was kind of, it was similar because we were traveling there in the spring, so it kind of felt summerish. This time we were going in November. Now, living in Southern California, temperatures are really very different. And they have this stuff called, rain that comes down from the sky, and it's really weird.
I've heard
So
about that one time.
exactly. So this was a matter of, oh, I'm going to need coats. Oh, I'm going to need sweaters. Oh, I'm going to need a scarf, umbrellas, things like that we just really don't think about in Southern California very much. But even looking at the stuff as it's getting ready to go in the suitcase, I'm like, am I really going to wear this stuff? I wore it every single day. Every day we were there, we lucked out weather-wise. We barely hit any rain, but every single day was sweater, jacket, scarf weather. So every day.
Lots and lots of layering over there. It sounds
like. So, layers are your friends.
Yes. I actually that was the first trip I took to New York City. I was walking through the streets and it was winter and I was like, I had a coat on. I thought I'd be fine. You don't realize you need earmuffs, you need a cap, you need a scarf, you need gloves. I'm walking down the street and I am literally going numb from how cold it's getting because I'm not prepared for this.
I haven't needed a scarf since I was about 5 years old growing up in New England, and I kind of completely forgot they existed. Yeah. But I had one that a friend of mine gifted me, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, and I'm like, great, it's lovely, I'm never going to use it. Well, I used it, and I used it every day. Like, these things are really nice.
It's really important, actually. It's very important. Yeah. So good for you. Now you left out at LAX, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
And from our previous conversation, you decided to take a car up there, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's
perfect. Excellent. And they in turn you scheduled the pickup as well. So you didn't do like an Uber or a rent a car or anything like that. Okay. And you didn't.
I mean, you certainly could. This was just a little bit, more reliable because we had scheduled it way in advance. We told them we need to be picked up at exactly this time, dropped off at exactly this time. So, again, control freaks. So I really pushed for that.
You know what, and praise you for being a control freak because I am one too, and so I see from your perspective. And when my husband, for example, when he's deciding, oh, it's okay, it's 5 minutes until the movie starts, let's go do something else, and then we'll come in after the previews. And I'm like, no. Let's not. So yeah, I'm on the same wavelength as you. So let's talk about the flight. So which airline did you decide to go
on? This time we actually ended up on Air New Zealand. And I was scratching my head with that going, but we're Americans and we're going, hey, okay. But we ended up on Air New Zealand and listened to some wonderful accents.
I love that flight. I actually did take, I think it was either Air New Zealand 1 or 2 in order to get over to London a couple of years ago. That was the exact flight that I took over. And for those of you who don't know, Air New Zealand is in part subsidized by the New Zealand wine industry. So it's flowing the whole time there. It doesn't matter whether you're a coach, doesn't matter whether you're first class. You get free wine at any time, at any point during the flight. All you have to do is ring the little button on your screen and let them know that you want to see it. I assume.
Really? I don't remember that.
I don't remember.
Literally, I don't remember it.
But they had free snacks. They had free. I did the exact same flight. I loved it. I will say the one thing about the Air New Zealand flight crew, I didn't really like the uniforms. They were very frumpy looking. But apart from that, it was a really lovely flight. Yeah, that's why.
Well, and a nice international crew. I mean, there were Italians, there were Spaniards, there were obviously New Zealanders, there were Englishmen. There was just pretty much a little bit of everything, and some accents I couldn't pick up at all.
That's totally understandable. It's okay. And how long was the flight for you? It was about 10, 11 hours, something like that?
It was about 10 hours, and I was really surprised. It kind of went by in a flash. So I was fully expecting, we're going to be here forever. And it's to compare it to other things. If I'm flying to the East Coast, for instance, inevitably, you've got one stop, you've got two stops, and you may leave California at such and such a point, and it's going to take you to get to pretty much anywhere on the East Coast. It's going to take about the same amount of time. For some reason, it takes like 9 or 10 hours.
Yeah.
You land in Dallas and you're there for an hour or two. So, okay, go to a restaurant, hang out, kill time. But, having a direct flight was like, oh, we're here already.
Yeah.
So it was really very nice.
Did you guys take an evening flight or did you take a daytime flight?
We took a daytime flight going over, and because of the way the time difference was, of course, we're exhausted. We've been up almost 24 hours by the time we'd gotten there. And lo and behold, by the time we get there, it's 9 in the morning or something like that. So, you want to go to bed, but you're like, I can't. It's the first day. So, we just really took it easy as much as we could. And we're like, okay, let's get to the hotel. We're not going to travel very far because we're slap happy, but we're going to go have some tea. We're going to have lunch. We're going to try to acclimate as much as we can, stay up so that when it's nighttime here, we're going to crash really hard.
Did you guys get to experience high tea while you were out there?
When did we not?
We did it like 3 times while we were there. You remember any of the places that you had high tea that were really exceptional?
Oh, there was one. Let's see, we traveled around to a number of different cities, but when we ended up in London proper, there was one place we just had some time to kill in the afternoon, and he was getting hangry, and we were both getting chilly, and it's like, okay, well, we've been walking for at least an hour. It's tea time. So the cool part, I loved that I was able to pull up my phone and just look up tea. Boom, all these places pop up. So I went to, I directed us to one that just happened to be very, very close by. Never heard of it. It was called TWG. Oh my God. It was intimidating because we walked into the first floor and I thought, oh, it's just a tea store. It's not a place to get tea, because there were just all these canisters and canisters of tea all over the place, and very, very fine frou-frou shop. And then I noticed there were stairs going upstairs where they were doing tea. Okay, fine, we'll go up there. It was an extremely formal-looking dining room, and it looked like a museum of tea, because there were just glass cases everywhere with all these antique tea kettles and tea pots and tea accessories from 1700s onwards, and it was kind of scary. And we sat down. We were the only ones there for whatever reason. It was, some day in the middle of the week, so probably everyone was at work. And the waiter came over with the tea menu. I'm not used to tea menus. And as I opened it up, I asked my hangry husband what he was going to have, and he just kind of scowls and he says he's going to order Earl Grey. And I went, no. What kind of Earl Grey? There's an Earl Grey section. There were literally 17 different kinds of Earl Grey. So by the time the waiter came over, I just told him, I'm scared. I'm just going to tell you flavors. I'm an ignorant American. help me out here. And he just kind of chuckled and nodded his head, and he said they get that a lot, and he took me through it and ordered for me and made an excellent choice, and we had a great experience.
We had tea multiple times when we were in London. I would say probably the best one we had was at this hotel that we went to that I guess Angelina Jolie had stayed at recently.
Oh, well.
So yeah, it was a really posh hotel, and I'm here like not really dressed to my finest, and but they had these like fully 5-foot standing like tea, trolleys, and with the with the different layers on each of them, and like you said, they have a tea menu. Also, I should take a step back for my students who are listening. Here in America, we're so used to having 3 square meals a day, and just that's it. Over there, across the pond, they typically have 4. They have your breakfast and your lunch typically. Then around 4 o'clock every day, they have tea, which is kind of like an interim meal. It's very proper, and there's a lot of different things that they do with it typically. But again, it's just, for the lack of a better term, it's kind of like a midway point between lunch and dinner. And then a lot of people over there do typically have dinner very late. They will usually have late dinner sometime around 8 or 9 p.m., which most people in the States usually aren't accustomed to. We usually eat around 5 or 6 o'clock, but in lieu of the tea time, that's what it is. So let's fast forward again back to where we were at. So where were your accommodations? Where did you guys end up staying?
We really hopped around quite a bit. So as I was mentioning, we spent the first day in London, and then we were traveling to Durham and York and Coventry and Manchester before we ended up back in London. So we hopped around to a couple of different hotels and B&Bs and such. And our main accommodation in London was wonderful. We ended up at a Mr. B&B. So it was cheaper, and it was, right dead center of exactly where we wanted to be without, all the hustle and bustle of the hotel and such. So I find that much cozier, and I really like that kind of concept. It's cheaper, and it's just nicer, and you don't feel that crush of all these people and waiting in lines and such.
Nice.
Yeah.
Let's go through your itinerary really quick. Let's talk about where you went individually, maybe each of the days that you went, and then maybe if we can just get a snippet or a sampling of maybe just one thing that you did at each of those locations.
Sure. One of the first things we did, of course, the first day we stayed in London, because the last thing we wanted to do was get off the plane after all that and then have to hop on a train with all of our luggage and travel for X amount more time. We were dead tired. We just needed some tea. So we got a hotel I'm forgetting exactly which area of London, but we were able to at least just get settled and go and have some lunch and just explore a little bit. And that's one of the things I really love to encourage people to do is, even if you've researched where you're going to go, just go and get lost. Because in a place like England, there's some story or adventure, or again, for geeks like me, history in every corner. So where we were, maybe like 2 blocks down was Temple Church, for instance. And you're like, what is that? And oh, gee, it's an old church founded by the Knights Templar. So I'm geeking out over that, and the law courts are across from that. And then passing by there, we found a very elaborate Twinings tea shop that, gee, had been there since the early 1700s, and it's the oldest tea shop in all of London. So as an American, where it's old, it's 50 years old, it's like seeing all this stuff is so cool. So that was on our first day.
Let me stop you there for just one second, if you don't mind. To my listeners and to my viewers, I want to express you really haven't experienced history until you've gone out of the country. Like, for example, I was saying, I grew up here in Southern California, so the oldest buildings that I was aware of were like 50, maybe 100 years old at the oldest here in Southern California. Then, like you grew up on the East Coast. So buildings over there are maybe a couple of 100 years old. You'll see a couple that go back that far. And that seemed really old by standard. And then all of a sudden, when you're going back to many of these countries in Europe and you're seeing the marble staircases warped because so many people have walked on them throughout the hundreds and hundreds of years, it's really quite an amazing moment to just.
It's very surreal.
It is. That's a good way to put it. It is very surreal.
And it's really hard sometimes to place things because we're used to, I liken it in historical terms to Tut's tomb. Where that was closed and that was it. Nothing else happened for the thousands of years it was closed until, Howard Carter found it. Well, with a lot of these things that are continuously going through time, they've gone through renovations. So you could have what you're looking at what you think is a Victorian building, and well, it's Victorian, that's built on top of Georgian, which is built on top of Tudor, which is built on medieval, which is built on, and it goes back and back and back. So it could be that once all this plaster comes off this wall, you've got periods and periods of different brickwork that could be dating all the way back to the Roman occupation of England. And it's just built on top of each other because, why knock down a perfectly good wall? Let's just incorporate it into this brand new office building.
Yep.
So that's one of the things that really blew my mind is, when you'd see literally the just the barely existing ruins of a church that just go into a completely modern office building.
You know what? I want to add to this conversation really quick. I recently did a trip. My husband and I recently took a cruise from Rome to Venice, and we went all the way around the coast. And when we were in Venice, we took a day trip to Verona, which is not too terribly far from Venice. Beautiful city, by the way. If anybody has had the opportunity to go there, I had been there before about 10 years ago with my best friend, and it was great. It was lovely, and I wanted to take my husband to see it for the first time. We decided to go on a tour there, and the tour actually took us into the basement of a Burberry department store. I'm like, why are we going into the basement of a department store? Turns out that they had recently done an actual, or I'm sorry, it wasn't Burberry, it was Benetton's. I apologize. And they were in the process of excavating the basement in order to do some additional stuff, and they found an ancient Roman estate or a house that had been right in the basement. So archaeologists are coming into the basement of this Benetton, and there's a specific area of the basement. They're selling jeans and t-shirts and sweaters on either side of this, but then they have an archaeological site right in the center, and it's preserved, and archaeologists go there every single week to do a little bit of additional work on it, but it's walled off from the public to touch it. It's just,
isn't it great
to be able to see? It's like you're right smack in the middle of history. So I'm sorry I didn't mean to take off track for a second, but I wanted to add to that. So again, thank you so much for mentioning that. So you were in, so that was your day in London. Let's continue after that.
Okay. After our first day in London, where we just kind of got acclimated time-wise, which I have to emphasize, especially the older you get, the more time it takes you to acclimate time-wise. The excitement only carries so much adrenaline. We ended up hopping on a train and heading up to Manchester. And that was kind of like the central point of the north where we wanted to be, because we wanted to be over there, and Manchester was kind of at the center. So we made that sort of our home base, and ended up in a hotel right on Canal Street, which served us well because that's the gay district of Manchester. So we had a fantastic time just bar hopping. And I learned a very important lesson. I do not understand the accents of Manchester drag queens. Not a chance. Totally. So, although I did get better at it the drunker I got, but I digress. Manchester was just so beautiful. We did a lot of walking in Europe, which of course you do anyway, far more than we do here. And at one point we decided, let's go check out the Manchester Cathedral. And that was one of those opportunities we had to just get lost. So we found ourselves in the middle of the downtown Manchester area where they'd set up this gorgeous, very, very old-looking European Christmas market. And just, selling all kinds of gifts, really beautiful quality stuff, souvenirs and everything. And again, this is early November. I'm thinking, this is really beautiful, but why are they doing Christmas already? It's like they skipped over Thanksgiving. They don't have that here. They can do that. So, fine. And I'm checking out different things, and right off the bat, I found things that I was interested in. again, really being a history geek and finding reproduction this, reproduction that, just all over the place, and super cheap prices compared to what we'd find them here for. So I was loving every bit of that.
Can I interrupt you for one more moment?
Sure. It's your show.
So, thank you. With all of the stability issues with what's going on with Brexit and the economy over in London, do you think the prices were significantly affected this time, more so than the last time you were there? I mean, did it seem like the prices were dramatically different?
I didn't really notice a difference. I think everybody there is, they're not holding their breath. They're waiting for things to happen. No one's really sure what's going to happen. And it was almost that subject I didn't want to address with anyone because it weighs heavily on their minds. And the trade-off that we had is, hi, I'm an American, don't blame me for Trump. And they would say, hi, I'm English, don't blame me for Brexit.
Okay.
Fair trade.
Makes sense. Okay, cool. So here we are in Manchester then. And by the way, thank you very much for answering that. So here we are in Manchester. What do we do here now? What, apart from the drag shows and apart from the cathedral, what else do we got?
That was really the best kind of like getting used to just being in England place for me, because we didn't have heavy destinations at that point. We were still trying to get used to where we were. But it was nice in terms of just kind of exploring the locale, get used to the weather, get used to the times, get used to the temperatures, get used to the way the trains worked and things like that, all of which took almost no time. I mean, even though I'm not used to any kind of public transportation here in Southern California, you just really fell into it very, very easily. And I think the train system, certainly the London Underground, I don't think they could get any easier. They really make it very foolproof. And even for someone like me who is a nervous traveler, if I don't know and understand every single piece, it was fairly foolproof.
Okay. By the way, I am a fan of British food. I know some people, I hear people knocking it for whatever reason. I don't know why. What was your opinion of the British cuisine?
I loved it. But basically, we were either doing ethnic restaurants, which for the most part, you're not going to find, just like here, you don't find typically American food. If you're going out, you're going to have French, you're going to have Italian, whatever. It's the same thing there, with the exception of if you go to pubs. And I love pub grub. Give me a game pie anytime. And I have yet to find a pub that served a bad game pie. They were all fantastic, to the point where I'm trying to replicate them here a lot. So I loved every single bit of the food that we had there. I avoided all the chains and everything. And you know, you can certainly do that. I mean, there's chain restaurants left and right that you'd recognize here from the States if you're that specific an eater. But I figure, you know, when in Rome, you know, well, when in London, do as the Londoners.
When in former Rome, or former
exactly.
Roman Empire.
When in Londinium. So I absolutely love the food there. And what's funny, they've always say the best Indian food in the world is in England. It's true. It's totally true.
Have you been to India?
No, but I know several people that have, and they agree. So, you know, it's sort of just a big joke ever since, you know, England took over India, and, you know, that whole thing with Victoria.
Oh yeah, that little thing that happened.
Yeah, that little thing.
Yeah.
But I absolutely loved it. No problem with the food at all.
Nice. Excellent. All right, so where do we go after Manchester?
After Manchester was the first part of the real destination bit, and that's when we went to Durham. And for me, Durham was really very, Durham was one of my bucket list items. In college, one of the things I did as part of my English minor is I really studied a lot of Anglo-Saxon and studied the language, studied the culture, and Durham is one of those destinations because it's the burial place of St. Cuthbert and the Venerable Bede, from whom we know all of the early English history. So going there was an absolute must, not only for the architecture and visiting their graves, but there are also grave goods that were buried with St. Cuthbert, which are some of the earliest embroideries that we have from England. And I had to see those. I've studied them, but I needed to see them with my own eyes and see just how big they are, how much they shine, things like that. So when we got up to that church, I was, you know, I will admit, the tears coming down my face as we're like walking up to Durham Cathedral. And it was just one of the most somber moments walking into it, because it's massive and it's so old. And you could feel the history. It's like the walls were breathing still. And again, it's living history, because there's been some form of church there, oh gosh, since 600 something. And there would be one, they'd knock it down, they'd refine it, they'd renovate it, so this part's this old, this part's this old, this part's this old, all the way through Victorian. So you've got just so much history all in one place. And you've got the graves, you've got different chapels dedicated to different things, you've got the treasury, you've got people that are attending mass or lighting candles and doing prayers, other people just being geeks like me. I ended up kneeling in front of the Venerable Bede's tomb and started reciting Cadman's hymn in Anglo-Saxon, just because
wow,
I just had to. It was just one of those things, I had to do it. So, I can say, check. And, I'm having my moment, and he's bearing with me for it. So we'd gone through the entire cathedral and still had some time to kill. And what I didn't realize is pretty much in the same complex, there is Durham Castle, which I had not even heard of, and it's right there. So it's like, well, we're here. We're probably not going to be here again anytime soon. So let's go and get a tour. So we did, and that was another one of my like, oh my God moments, because this castle was left over from the Norman conquest. So you're thinking, okay, ancient castle, and they've refurbed the first floor into how it looked during the Tudor period. Cool. Okay, I want to go check that out. But most of the castle's off limits because it's currently a dormitory for the university students. Like, they get to live in a castle while going to school. Those brats, I think of the prison cell that was my dorm when I went to college. I didn't get to live in a castle. And then one of the funny parts is while we were getting our tour in the courtyard and a group of the students comes out, I'm looking at the students and going, didn't I just see that one on Great British Baking Show last week? Sure enough, it was.
Wasn't that seriously?
So that cracked me up.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's impressive.
Yeah, it was pretty funny.
Awesome.
So I was like, okay, I don't want to be too much of a geeky American fanboy here.
But can I have your autograph?
I wanted to, but they were going off and my tour was going. I'm like, later. So I'll start with Facebook. So we did that tour. We really enjoyed it, and it was so beautiful. And of course, my husband's into everything Elizabethan, so having something that was restored to its Tudor into Jacobean times was really impressive. Excellent. And that left us just enough time to get back to the train. The sun's about to set, and right when we left, I looked over my shoulder when we were crossing the bridge, and I saw that magnificent cathedral, and just the river, the cathedral, nothing modern. It was just this postcard moment, and I'm like, this view hasn't changed in over 1,000 years, and I'm living it. That's really pretty darn cool.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
And you tell the story well, by the way, so thank you for sharing.
Oh, go on.
So where do we go after Durham?
After Durham, let's see, where did we go after Durham? After Durham, we went to Coventry. And that was one of the main reasons that we went at this time of year, because there's this thing known as the Original Reenactors Market. And again, as living history geeks, it's hard to find our stuff. If you're not, if you're not a fine craftsman and you know how to do your own sewing and do your own metalwork and do all you have to one way or another get your stuff. Everything from the clothes that you wear, to the pavilions you camp in, to the furniture, to the glasses you drink out of, the pottery, all that stuff. So where do you go? You can't exactly go to Walmart and get this stuff. Mm-hmm. So lo and behold, we found out that there was this reenactors market, and it did anything from Roman period through Regency. And it was just like, you'd have this convention center full of these market stalls of people just selling, all kinds of historical goods. So we went to that, and we were there, a good half hour early, standing in line in the rain, and just, let us in, let us in, let us in. It's money. So we went shopping like mad. And I came out of that with, glassware and beads and books and more books, and I got to meet a couple of people that I've been a fanboy of for a couple of years that I've seen on various history shows that are absolute, world-renowned experts at their stuff, and I'm like, hi, can I get your, no.
So you are geeking out everywhere you go. Oh, Joe.
I was totally geeking out, and it was so much fun. And of course, as it turns out, we would run into people that we knew there, because even though it's like the only market like this, to my knowledge, in the world, it's like people descend, and we're such a niche group that you're always going to run into people one way or another. And it was fun trading stories with people, like people that live in England that are starving students that are reenactors, and they're talking about going from an event from one place to another and being in full chain armor and shields and things, and having to get on the tube and just ride that as a reenactor while everyone's being awfully polite but still giving them the look. That was just fun. So that was our destination when we were in Coventry.
Awesome. All right, where do we go after Coventry?
After Coventry, we went to London proper, and that's where we got to say, okay, here are the things that we're going to do. And one of the things that we did in London, which kind of ties into what you were saying earlier about the department store, is I found out, because my hubby had found out about this. He said, hey, do you want to go to the temple or to the Mithraeum? And I went, well, baby, what the heck is that? And a Mithraeum is a temple to Mithros. Like, oh, I didn't know they had one here. I'm not sure. Sure, what the heck? So we went to find it, and just like you're saying, very, very modern business skyscraper. And in the basement was this temple of Mithros.
Yep.
And they only found it sometime in the 1950s, and it is not only like the only one in England, but it is the most intact one that's been found yet in Europe. So when they found it, they're like, the design looks like a Mithraeum, and if that's the case, we should be able to find these things here. Oh, here they are. And at the end, there should be an altar with a statue. Oh, here's the head of the statue. So they absolutely knew what it was, and they found all these artifacts, all of which were on display when you first walked in. And I'm geeking out, taking lots of pictures of that, and then going down even further into the basement where they dimmed the lights, and then they did this very cool lighting effect that showed probably what the temple design would have looked like when it was intact, and then they brought all the lights up so you could see what's left, and you're walking on glass on top of it all. That was awesome.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I want to get more information from you on that when we go back to England in a couple of years. So
absolutely,
I really would like to see that. I find the juxtaposition of the modern with the ancient so fascinating, and it's one of those things you can't forget because it's just so in your face. It's just amazing.
Well, and that segues nicely into one of my big missions while I'm over there. Is I had this answers some of your questions before. One of the things that I pre-prepared for is I purchased a mudlarking license before I went over to London.
What? I'm sorry, what again?
Mudlarking.
Can you tell my students and myself a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I knew you'd ask that. Mudlarking, the term comes from Victorian, and basically in Victorian England, it was not uncommon. Obviously, you had a big class difference, and in the lower classes, the desperately poor, elderly, and young children would go out on the Thames at low tide, find whatever they could. Look for money that had been lost, look for anything that might be valued that they could sell, and they were known as mudlarks. Well, in the modern context, a mudlark is kind of like an amateur archaeologist, and you have to register and you have to get a license for it. There's different types of mudlarks, and the Thames is completely off limits to everyone unless you have a mudlark license. And there's certain areas where you can go down at low tide and you can scrape and you can look for things. And you really got to be, like I said, a geek to appreciate this kind of a thing. And, you think the Thames has basically been a dumping ground for 2,000 years. Something broke, you threw it in the Thames. That's just what was done. So you've got everything from Roman Britain to Anglo-Saxon to Norman to Tudor to Georgian to Jacobean, Victorian, Regency, everything, and it's all just muddled up together. So you can find, a Victorian bottle next to Tudor dress pins, next to garnets, next to whatever, and it's just all there. And
Did you happen to
off
find anything
to most people, but I'm
Oh,
sorry?
did you happen to find anything specific while you were there?
Lots. Um, in this particular trip, and I got to do this once before, which is why I was chomping at the bit to do this again. One of the most common things that you find are clay pipes, and this is something most people don't think of. You'd be like, why in the world are there all these white clay pipes all over the place? Broken bits, but basically, if you think in terms of modern industrialization versus the time period, if you were to be selling a tobacco pipe, you would sell the pipe and you'd give somebody a little pouch of tobacco. Well, in the age before the sewing machine, do you really want to hand stitch all of those little pouches? No. So what they did is they did these disposable clay pipes that were pre-packed with tobacco, and you sold that as a one-off. So the clay pipe itself was like the cigarette butt of anywhere from about 1590 through the Victorian age.
Oh, wow.
So you've got a kabillion of these clay pipes all over the place. And because they changed shape over time, you can tell exactly how old it is. So I found, this time, for instance, I found a clay pipe mostly intact that had the armorial information that told me, oh, this is a George III armorial. So, to let that sink in, it's like, okay, this is a late 1700s pipe that no one has touched since they smoked it. I'm the first person to find it and hold it in my hand.
Wow.
And, to put that in perspective, it's like, okay, that's Mad King George. That's the George that this country broke away from. He was our king in the late 1700s. So some of the things that I found, I found Roman Britain terracotta roof tiles, and you can identify those easily. I found a couple of bits of Roman pottery. Let's see, a ton of Staffordshire ware, which is also known as colonial ware, and it was kind of like the mass-produced pottery that was made to be sent to the American colonies. So that's a really pretty feathery shape, and it's cool because we find it there, but sometimes some of it washes up on the beaches in New England from shipwrecks that were coming over. Let's see, tons of clay pipes. I found two perfectly round stone shot pieces. And because they're stone and they're not cast, that's probably 1300s to 1500s.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, and you're holding this thing, it's like, it's really cool, and then all of a sudden, this might have killed someone. It just kind of puts things in perspective, because for me, every one of those objects tells a story. And there was one moment where there was this, I just called it a mud berg. The thing about the Thames is it's super, super, super silty. So it's like a fine layer of dust is all that mud. And sometimes it's just like a massive chunk that fell, that collapsed, and there's all kinds of stuff in there. So at one point I'm looking at it and I see this little perfectly round ceramic ring on the top, and I'm like, that's either a ginger beer bottle or an inkwell. Please, please, please be whole. So I'm taking my trowel and I'm kind of scraping around it, and I pulled up an intact Victorian, they call it a pork pipe inkwell. And it wasn't until I got home that I realized the cork was still in it.
So the ink was still part of it, or not?
Well, the ink was gone. The cork stopper was still in place. So I'm thinking, okay, this is exactly where it was thrown by somebody who, in the days before ballpoint pens and such, who knows? Could have been Dickens, could have been Oscar Wilde, could have been anything, anybody, but it's just fascinating to think this has been sitting here for at least 100 years just waiting for me to find it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What an adventure. That's so fantastic.
And people find all kinds of things, and the museums have finally started to really respect that, because typically they are really looking for objects that are in situ. So an Anglo-Saxon camp, okay, we find it exactly as it was back in the time, and we know it. But since all this stuff is just together in the Thames, and you don't know where it washed from, where it came from, there are objects that are out of their context. So for a long time, the museums weren't really interested in that. But now that they realized, hey, we can identify these things, and sometimes they're kind of better than what we've got in the museums, they take it more seriously. So the mudlarks have to work directly with the museums, and there's a couple of rules and regulations that you have to, like if you find objects that are that you think might be significant that are older than 300 years, you need to check with the museums and have them look at it, because technically everything that's down there is owned by the crown. So if you find something that might be considered treasure, the museum they have the first right of purchase, but if they don't want to purchase it, they will give you a letter of release on the behalf of the crown, which in and of itself would be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, that just sounds amazing. So
yeah, it's an adventure, and that's something I love doing. It was, even though it was cold as could be, I absolutely love doing it.
You know, archaeologists aren't afraid of the weather, so
No.
nor anthropologists, but I mean, in the same aspect, you know, it's just a matter of how you deal with the specific of the area. So it is what it is.
And I figured, how many times am I going to get to do this in a lifetime? It's worth getting a cold. And besides, you know, when I was done, I went directly to the Mudlark pub, had a really great pork pie, and had some mulled wine, and suddenly I was feeling much better.
Mulled wine does wonders, you know that?
Mm-hmm. No question.
All right. And what else did we do while we were still back in London in that area?
Oh, we'll definitely have to go to the British Museum again. And the British Museum I love because a lot of the museums there are free. British Museum, you know, you just have to go through the lines and go through security, and then you are bombarded by some of the greatest treasures, if not the greatest treasures in the world. So, you know, it depends what you're looking for. And one thing I advise is if people are going to go to the British Museum and you have more than one interest in terms of culture or time period, do not try and do it in one day. Because I don't know how everyone else is. I can't process that. If I'm like micro-focusing on, you know, I just want to see paintings. Mm-hmm. I can't look at other things and the paintings. I want to just look at the paintings. But when you consider the Rosetta Stones there, the Elgin marbles are there, some of the greatest Elizabethan treasures are there. There's treasures from Syria. There's treasures from China. It's like,
no, it's overwhelming, like you were saying.
It's very overwhelming.
In fact, I went there a few years ago, and I remember seeing like a mummy exhibit there, which was fascinating on its own. I round the corner, and in my face is the Rosetta Stone. Like,
yeah,
and you're like, wait, this is the Rosetta Stone, the Rosetta Stone, and it's right there in front of my face, and I'm like, I have to have a picture of this. It's overwhelming to me to see such an amazing piece of history, like inches from my fingers. It's just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating when there's something that you've looked at and you've known about for your entire life, and you're not prepared for when you turn the corner that it's going to be right there.
Yeah, it's incredible. You know, and to my students, when you have the ability to explore all these different museums that are out there, actually, I would actually go so far as to say, like with what you did, you know, cathedrals and museums both have an amazing amount of history in them, especially as you go through the world. I am not a particularly religious person, but I do explore a lot of cathedrals just coincidentally whenever we're traveling, because they have so much wonderful history and beauty to offer that it's really just mind-boggling when you go to all these places.
Yes.
It's fascinating just to see it all. I mean, I'm overwhelmed with it, so I absolutely understand what you're saying.
Oh, and I just realized I forgot an entire section of the trip. My absolute favorite part is when we went to York.
Oh, yes.
We stayed 3 days in York, and you know how sometimes you can go someplace and you've never been there, but all of a sudden you feel it. You're just like, I could live here. It makes sense to me. York was definitely one of those places. We ended up at a hotel called the York Priory, which I would recommend, up one side, down the other. People there could not bend over backwards enough for us. And it was just outside the main part of town, but less than a mile walk. So there's no point in getting an Uber or a taxi. Hey, let's walk. So part of the way there, we were able to scale the old York walls, which date back originally to the Roman founding of York, when it was Urbinium. And, you're able to walk that and be able to check out the city and how beautiful it is, but also realize this has been around in one form or another, for about 2,000 years, and it still works, and it's still cool. And everything in York, there was so much from the medieval into Tudor period that I did not expect to be there. And that was something that really threw me. Everything from a Tudor age guild hall to Barley Hall, which was like a house that belonged to the mayor that kind of got forgotten. They built a bunch of things around it, and it got sort of covered over with other stuff. So they were like this close to bulldozing it when they started pulling things off and going, these are really old timbers. This is a really old design. And they figured out exactly what it was, restored it back to how it was in the late 15th century, and now it's a living trust museum and completely done up like that with people that are in persona, in the right costuming and everything. And it's right down the road from York Minster, right across from one of the best tea houses in York. And it's just so amazing. Just walking through the merchant area of York, which was really my favorite, just being able to walk through it, because the merchant area, known as the Shambles, is pretty much exactly the way it was designed from Viking times forward. So you've got very, very thin streets that are not meant for cars, they're meant for people to walk. And even though the shops now are all like Bath and Body Works or Harry Potter shops, it's like, yeah, that's in the facade, and you look up and it's Tudor architecture, and you know that these buildings have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. They're just continuing to live through time. It's like, wow. It was just amazing.
What a great exploration.
Mm-hmm.
I could talk to you for days about this stuff, but we have to get back to the States now. So,
yeah.
And I know, but you know what? The beauty of being able to do all these travels is that you can start to plan for your next one as soon as you get back. So that's
already planning.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, returning, did you also go through New Zealand or Air New Zealand as well?
Yes, we did.
Okay, perfect. I hope that everything went smoothly on the way back as much as it did on the way there.
Everything went really smooth. Just, obviously the excitement level is down, and you're like, oh, we're going home and back to work, and it's just depressing. But other than that, I mean, the flight itself is fantastic. And let's see, I had massive carry-on compared to coming over because I did a lot of shopping. And no problem with that. Everybody was really super nice. And even when we got back through LAX, I'm thinking, oh, we have to go through customs and all that. But we had, what's the name of it? The Global Pass.
Oh, global entry, yeah.
Boom, 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 boom. Quick.
Yeah.
I was stunned.
It's global entry is one of those things I highly recommend to all my students. It's about $150 for about 5 years, but it's the difference between waiting an hour to go through customs and waiting 15 minutes or less.
Oh, at least an hour.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. At least out of LAX. Some smaller airports I can imagine it's not so bad, but LAX, if you're traveling from anywhere in the Los Angeles or Orange County area, it's massive. And so, yeah, absolutely, like you were saying, it can get kind of crazy. So, So let's talk about the post-vacation timelines. So let's talk to a student who's a first-time person, never been to the UK before. What would you say are some of the pros to be able to go on this kind of a trip?
One of the you broke up there a little bit.
Yeah, what are the pros? What are the benefits of going on a trip like this?
It really gives you such a different perspective of life, of how people live, and really kind of how do I put it? Almost like an alternate perspective, because you're thinking Americans, Englishmen, not really all that different, speak the same language, obviously, very similar, history and culture since we broke off from them. But sort of like you were talking about with dinner and such before, it's more of a relaxed pace. In the States, it's a matter of rush. You rush through dinner, you rush through this, you've got this errand to do, that errand to do. Over there, they walk, they take their time, they enjoy their tea, they just go at a slower pace. The days are longer, but you're not as stressed out because you're just going at your own pace. And You know, maybe it was being on vacation, or maybe it was just being around all these people that just weren't in a rush. It's like if you go to New York, you're there for 5 minutes before you get stressed out because everyone's moving so quick. You have people knock into you. It's not like that there. It just isn't. Everything's slower, and that's really very nice.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for purposes of a first-time traveler, what are some things that they may want to be aware of? Maybe some culture shock issues.
I would say one of the funniest things actually is the money. You know, we're used to the American greenbacks, and they're all the same size, they're all the same color. They're different colors and they're different sizes. So you're sitting there going, hey, it's all funny money, and they don't have $1 bills. They have $1 coins and $2 coins, and the change all looks it just looks like Monopoly money. So it's really easy to just spend like crazy because you think you're spending Monopoly money, but you're not.
Yeah, exactly. And then
Yeah.
what other things do you think my students might want to know? Maybe some value adds, cost savings, or even best practices about going on a trip like this?
I'm sorry, I cannot remember the name of it. There is, you can easily look it up if you're looking up any of the major tourist attractions. There is kind of like a package deal you can buy into that will give you either discount or sometimes free admissions to things like Westminster Abbey, St. Paul's Cathedral, various museums and such. And it also comes with a prepaid Oyster card. And the Oyster card is what you use to get on the tube and the underground. So, you know, anytime you're taking the subway, you have to pay. And you use that little card, and it's just like a little prepaid ATM account that you use for travel. And it's just so much more convenient.
Absolutely.
So basically, it's a little expensive. Well, it's not really expensive. It's like $50, $100, something like that. But with what you're saving, if you're really going to hit all these destinations, it's going to save you money.
Absolutely. Joe, I really want to thank you so much for helping with this vlog and podcast.
My pleasure.
If people wanted to know more about your destination or just a little bit about the travel that you did, how could they do that? How could they find out more about that?
Oh, gosh. Well, I blogged about it a little bit, some of my adventures, and it's really just my personal experience and take on things, being, you know, again, a self-professed history geek, but I love being able to share this information and get as much out there as possible. But if you really want to research like your destinations and such, there's so many YouTube videos that are really helpful in terms of travel guides and tips, and they tell you like the little hidden things here and there. The information's all really out there. It's made very, very easy for people that are traveling because they obviously want to encourage you to travel. So, you know, hey, the more information they can get out for that, the better.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are not watching this but are listening instead to the podcast, you can come to Joe's blog at www.storytimewithjoe.dreamwidth, that's DREAMWIDTH.org. And it's a great blog. I had an opportunity to look at it earlier today. No, you do a great job. So thank you so much for incorporating that. Again, Joe, I want to thank you so much for being on this. For those of my students who are watching and who would like to be notified when new videos pop up, simply click the bell icon on YouTube in order to be able to get access to that. If you haven't already, please subscribe. We love to get new subscriptions. We love to be able to share our information with you. And of course, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. We really appreciate that. If you're listening to this on one of the podcast networks, please give it a rating. We absolutely appreciate it. And until next time, make every day a travel adventure. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care and bye-bye now.